On today's video, we're going to do the 500 spring test. We're going to do it both in a spring rater and in the test bench. And we're going to give you the results and the information from that and let you make your decision on the 500-pound spring. Hey, on this video, we're going to do the 500-pound spring, okay? And before we get started, I want you guys to like and subscribe and comment between each other, but comment and subscribe to our channel, help it to grow and help us to keep doing these videos. Give us ideas of what you want to see. And tonight we're going to do several videos on things you want to see, but first, the 500-pound spring. And to get started, we're going to give you some basic specs from each spring, okay? And right off the bat, we're going to cover two things. One, we did not include Swift spring in this test, and there is no reason for that other than maybe I forgot. There is no reason. I didn't have a Swift spring, and I just thought I got, and I just dropped the ball. So if Swift or somebody associated with Swift, a dealer wants to send us a 500-pound, 5-inch, 9.5-inch spring to test, to put in with this data, we will do that, and we'll include it in the data for this video. And I feel bad about that. But so what we are testing is AFCO, Hyperco, Landrum, Eibach, and BSB. And we're going to start with this AFCO. This is an AFCO spring. It is one of the Black Series springs. And I don't know that there's a great difference between the black and the yellow, but this is the black spring. And one of the things that we test on these springs, besides like wire diameter, is number of coils and coil spacing on the start and the stop. Okay, so on the AFCO spring, it's a 4 1/8 coil spacing. Its top open is inch 060. Its bottom opening is inch 095. Now, we'll get into these open close as we do the springs. So we will get into that so you understand that later. Okay, Hyperco, 3.5 coils. It's open at 875. It closes at 960. Landrum, it's 3.5 coils also. It opens at 840 and closes at inch 050. Also in the video, we'll do start and stop coils on some of the other data that we're going to show. We'll do a stop and start coil. So Eibach is 3.25 coils. It starts at inch 080 and it stops at 1340. BSB, 3.5-inch coils also. It starts at 310 and ends at 730. Okay, what the start and stop is, the open and close, the open and close. So the open and close is halfway across from the end of the coil to this spot right here, and halfway across at the bottom to this spot right here. This is top and bottom open and close. So on our spring, it's 310, 730. The rate that so they call the rate stops when these get even. So it's a little different probably on a end of coil like such. But that's rate. When that rate stops, it stops building rate, and then it consistently makes the same rate on through the spring. Some springs will change or be different in how they do that. Now, this is generally true when a spring touches the end of the coil or lays down on the end of the coil. Okay, ours is also half the diameter of the wire. Some of these others may have a little tighter helix on the end of the spring, like this one does. So the reason we built ours this way was to match the bottom of the cup of a standard arm. And that was about how the helix in the standard arm was. I don't really, and the other thing we did was we squeezed this last half coil down so it didn't rub the cup. In our bench test, these did rub the control arm a little, the lower control arm, because of the diameter. So we did squeeze this down just a little. But as you can see, we are a little flatter on the coils. That's why sometimes when you turn them over, they look all crooked and stuff. It's because like ours is half the wire diameter, where theirs is almost the full wire diameter. Okay, so you understand that. One thing I want to show you here before we get too far is an open coil spring. This is an open coil spring. This is probably one of the better spring designs, okay? But it's also a lot harder to understand the rating and how the spring's made. So the manufacturer dictates. All these springs that we did here, we did on a 1+1 test, okay? And that's not really that's not the best test in the world, 1+1. That's what we were taught to do. It's just not a very good test. And as you rate springs, you learn that it's just not a very good test. But this spring with the open coil, I believe, is one of the better designs. As I said, it is hard to rate. Sometimes they rate them to like this, say this 5.5-inch spring. So let's say it's 1,000-pound springs. They may take it to 1,000-pound plus 1 inch. They may have a designated number. I think Vogelin had a designated number of 1,500 pounds plus 1 inch. So open coil springs, you don't see very many of them. They are a good design. They may be one of the better designs. You don't see very many of them in the market. And we quit doing it because it became difficult for people to understand. Everybody wanted to 1 inch, and they didn't rate very well 1 inch, because they weren't built that way. In general, the AFCO spring at a 1 inch rating, the AFCO spring rated at 508 pounds. The Hyperco rated at 506 pounds. The Landrum rated at 526. The Eibach rated at 501, and the BSB rated at 499. In the data, you'll see that we do have a free height test. When we test the free height, we put the flat side down. We have a digital height gauge, and we run that digital height gauge right across this intercoil. We always put intercoil to the right, and we run the beam, comes down like this and touches. It's 3-place digital readout. This is how we measure free height when we measure it via inches, okay? When we measure these springs well, we measure our springs a little different, okay? But we measure our springs on CNC device. So we have our own CNC spring rater, and we measure our springs that way. So the way we measure them, of course, it would go in a helix cup, and this would be 9,500 tall. We bring the spring down to 9,400, and we get a poundage reading, okay? And we do that because it's just so much faster. But that's how each spring rated. And I might be able to slip a little video in of how we rate the springs, so you can see that. We did rate these springs in compression and rebound both. And honestly, they all rated very well in both compression and rebound. I have a chart here that will show we started at the 9400, they're 9500. Each spring is a little different height. Okay, so springs are not just going to be 13 inches or 16 inches. And if you tape measure it and you go, oh, it's a little short, well, you should have tape measured it from the very first day. Okay, these springs are a lot harder to measure height because of the piggy tail on the bottom, and the open piggy tail would be super hard to measure height. But so it is a little harder to measure height, which is a problem. But we should measure the height of a spring when we first get it, because they're not all going to be 16 inches or 13 inches or 9.5 inches. Okay. With that being said, we are a 9-inch tall spring, a little over 9. So we kind of in the IMCA world legal because they give you a 1/2 inch, 9.5 plus or minus 1/2 inch. But each spring did kind of compress down through the rates pretty evenly. Um, the AFCO spring, it so we went from basically 9/200 to 7 inches, and we did it every 200 thousandths. We collected a data point, okay, and the from 9 inches to 7 inches, the AFCO spring went from 289 to 1,296 pounds. The Hyperco spring, and it was much easier to determine Hyperco when it was blue. And I personally kind of like the blue better than the silver, but this is a different spring they have that it's silver. The Hyperco went from 263 to 1270. Landrum went from 311 to 1345, which was the stiffest spring over the travel. The Eibach went from 231 to 1223, which out of the conventional 9.5-inch springs did make this the softest and kind of the most progressive spring. You'll see that later. But the BSB, it went from, now we can't really do a 9, so we went from 125, which was 8.8, to 10.026. Okay, so we are going to be softer because we are starting out a 1/2 inch lower. And if you look at the chart and you move it back up to the 7.4, we're about the same. AFCO was 11.05, Hyperco was 10.74, Landrum 11.35, Eibach 10.24, and we'd have been 10.26. Okay, is there an advantage to a shorter spring? Yes, there is. Is there an advantage to a real short spring in the front? Well, yes, there is, but there's also disadvantages. So on a race car, every time you do something, there's always a positive and negative. So the positive is we want to draw from the most positives. We don't want to draw from something that has a bunch of negatives. Is an 8-inch spring better than a 9-inch spring? The verdict's still out on that. I can't tell you that for sure. The 9-inch spring does have distinct characteristics over a 9.5-inch spring, and you wouldn't think so. But the spring makes rate a little different than others. So it just does allow the car to get on the right front a little easier, and it does allow the car to stay on the right front a little easier, a little longer. If you look at the rebound charts in these tests, you'll see that there really wasn't a lot of variation. So you always hear guys like, oh, we need to check our springs and rebound. Well, I think that's probably a good plan. Our springs, our car, we get feel from our spring, our shock in the compression stroke. Okay, we get feel from our spring in the rebound stroke. But now checking springs in a rebound stroke is a little more difficult. And if you're doing a 1+1, it's not really that feasible. But when we rate these springs, not us, when our manufacturer rates these springs, they take them to what they call block. So this is a preset spring. It's been preset 3 times. This is a shot peen heat treated spring. I can't say what the other companies are doing, but I can say what I'm doing. I have ideas what they're doing, but I don't know. I'm not there. Okay. Um, they take it to block and they rate it coming back up. Here's where the 1+1 falls off. Anybody that does a preset will generally maybe rate from in the rebound stroke. Okay. Um, our tolerance says this spring has to be in that rate over 80% of its travel. Okay. And once you take it to block, and block is like almost coil bind touching, full travel. 80% gets us back to about the 2-inch height, 7 and 7 inches. So our vast amount of travel. So when we do this 1+1, we're just getting to the top. So we're testing a spring when we do a 1+1 in whether it's a front spring or a rear spring, we're testing it in the worst point or part of the spring. Okay, we're not testing it in the best part of the spring. So, but it also is really kind of the depth in which we are utilizing the spring. So we're not deep into these springs. We're just kind of at the very top of the springs. And I'll explain that some more in a stock car video we're going to do, with setups and spring rates and ride heights and stuff. But so the compression and the rebound, and as you see by the chart, it doesn't change much. Like for an example, our 8.8 number, 2 pounds. And there is a little bit of variance on the machine that we check these on in the rebound with it coming back. This test was done more on a conventional machine that we have. These were not done on the CNC. We do the production stuff on the CNC. These were done on my own spring smasher spring rater. Okay, so depending on when you pull in and stop at that number kind of varies a little. So all these springs kind of varied about 2 to 3 pounds in the compression stroke. So I think they all passed the compression rebound with flying colors. Okay. Initially, we said that the Landrum tested out at 525. Is that a killer? Is that a big deal? I don't see it as a big deal. Okay. And the reason why is because if we're setting a ride height, that number is never going to exist. If we're setting a load number, then we're just going to a load number, and it doesn't matter which spring we're on. We might just have to put a half a turn or quarter turn less or more into it to get to that particular number. And it really won't even be that; it'll be more like an eighth. So the variation on the car for that number at that load is so small, I don't think it really matters. So I think you could almost put a 500, 550 in the right front and just race the whole season on them rates, because you could put it literally to any load number you want virtually. So I think our understandings of this, if you're going to use a load number, you've kind of canceled out ride height. You've kind of canceled out. To me, ride height's very important, because we're talking about when we say 3-inch travel number at 1250. Well, what's that mean? What spring rate are we on, and what's our starting point? So if our starting point was already an inch below, then this is crucial, because this will dramatically change how that car is going to handle at 1250. So just keep that in mind. The rate change on these springs. Okay, the rate change, the AFCO spring, it kind of started out at 99, 101, 100, 104. So it built a little rate per every 200,000, and it ended up, it got down there and it had one bad number at 88 pounds of rate change. And then it went back. And I'll double check to verify that. If that is wrong, because I just seen that myself, and I feel like it's a little off. Maybe it was in the math in the chart that created that. So I'll double check that to see. The Hyperco, basically 101, 103, 101, 102, 102, 101, 100, and then finished at 96. Also, very consistent in its rate change, which is good. This means its open closed was very consistent. The Landrum, 104, 105, it pulled an 88 number right in there around 8400. 105, 106, 103, 106, 107. So let's talk about this a little bit. 103, 100 to 107. Okay, that means in that 200,000, it gained 3 more pounds. Okay, so we're talking about 10, 15 thousandths difference, 20 thousandths difference in height in that. Very, very, very minute. And when you look at these numbers like this, and you think, oh, that 88 probably doesn't mean nothing. So Eibach was, when I first did the test, I did all these, I did mine last, and I'm like, you know what, the Eibach really come out looking, maybe more favorable, even though it was a lighter spring. So it started out about 98 pounds, 96, 96, 100, 99, 101, 102. It pulled a 98 down in there 2 times. You'll see it on the chart. But, again, very consistent building rate down through its travel. And so this is over 2 inches. And like I said, it's in the top 2 inches. Our spring was basically 100 or 101, and we had 199 in there. Right at 8400. Here again, I think that's good, but I don't think none of them failed big, because what you would really want, if the spring was really going to be magical and do what you want it to do, it would start out soft and it would build rate down low in the latter part of its travel, and it would do it, progressively. So we'll look at the bench test, okay? And then after this, we'll look at each spring, free height, number of coils, wire diameter, and some of the technical. But in the bench test, this is the spring in a lower control arm on a bench that we built to test loads, using a load stick. We're setting the car at ride height, which is basically, we're going to call 7 3/4, at initial starting point of 600 pounds. So we're on a bearing cup. It's an ID swivel cup. So it's not an OD cup. This is tested on an ID cup, starting at 600 pounds of load. And we went 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. Okay, so the AFCO went 824, 1,029, 1257. Each inch the spring travels is 685 thousandths in the first inch, 665,000, and 690. Okay, in the fourth inch, it will travel more. And these travels are measured at center line. So there's can be some variation depending on how you determine you want to measure the spring travel, okay? So the way we measured it was there's a pad bolted into the stock shock location, and there's crosshair on it, and we tested the spring height, checked the travel at the crosshairs. So it set at 0, we moved it, and this is how much it moved. 685 in the first inch, and it moves the same for each spring. 685 in the first inch, 665 in the second inch, and 690 in the third inch. So basically, if you want to call it a 680 average, that's what the spring's moving. Okay. The rate change in the arm was 224 pounds, 205 pounds, 228 pounds. That's the AFCO spring. The Eibach spring, or excuse me, Eibach, the Hyperco spring started at 600-pound load, first inch, 820. That's 4 pounds less than the AFCO. 1036 at 2 inches and 1260 at 3 inches. That makes it 3 pounds heavier and at full compression. So it's leading the race at that deal. The rate change was 220 pounds in the first inch, 216 pounds in the second inch, and 224 pounds in the third inch. That's Hyperco's Platinum Spring. Landrum, I want to make sure that was Landrum. Landrum Spring set at 600 pounds. The first inch went 825. The second inch went 1036. And the third inch went 1249. So this is the heavier spring. This was the spring that rated 1 inch the most at 536, I believe, 526. But this one so far out of these three is the lightest at 3 inches of travel at 1249. Leave a little room here so you can see my mug. Eibach, starting at 600, first inch went 837. Okay, this was the lightest spring. Second inch, 1041, and the third inch, 1235. So spring started out a little heavier, ended up lighter. In its travel test, that was the softest spring, besides ours. That was the softest of the four, and it initially was at 501. Okay, but it's out of the four in full travel, it has become the softest spring. Okay, PSB spring loaded at 600 pounds, 1 inch, 837. Oh, excuse me, wrong one. PSB spring loaded at 600 pounds in the first inch was 777. The second inch, 977. The third inch, 1222. So I think I forgot to say the rate change on the Landrum was 225 in the first inch. That's this spring. 211 in the second inch, 213 in the third inch. Eibach was 237 in the first inch, 204 in the second inch, and 194 in the third inch. So see, that spring made less rate per inch. Okay, now if we used to go to the 4 inch, it would probably continue to do the same thing, but do it in a different way, because the 4th inch on a Chevelle lower arm and a Chevelle frame tends to grow bigger than the others. The travel distance, the 680 number becomes a much bigger number. Okay, rate change on our spring in 1 inch, 177 pounds. At 2 inch, 200 pounds. At the 3 inch, 245. So we're gaining some rate as we go down instead of losing rate, but same thing. So these charts will be posted. A link below will be posted along with the other charts that we're getting ready to take a look at. Will be posted below. So this is the first step of this part of the video, and we'll be right back. Before we come back, remember, like, subscribe, help us to grow our channel. Okay. All right. We are going to put on some more data from the spring test, but as I uploaded the slides, they were just all blurry, and I kept changing the resolution, so and nothing seemed to work. So we'll end up entering this data. This is about each spring. It's some more data about each spring, and I'll put it in a blog on the website, bsbgofast.com. I'll put a link in our description down below to that blog, and it may not show up tomorrow when this video is released, but will show up by the end of the week. So I apologize for that. It just, like I said, I just didn't think it looked good, so we'll do it a different way. I hope this clarifies some stuff on the 500 spring. The reason we did it was because initially when we did that first test on the bench, the 500-pound spring seemed to be the weirdest or a little different. So I decided let's test different brands and see where our spring stands in comparison to them. All right, so I appreciate you guys watching. As always, go fast, go left, God bless, and we'll see you next time.